Road trip. I call the front seat. And it's totally not because I saw something breathing in the back. Keep your eyes open because today we're driving down the road after dark with these allegedly true and terrifying night drive stories. Careful now, your eyes play tricks on you as trees soar past. No other cars in sight. If you have a scary story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. I'd love to narrate some stories from Yellowstone National Park or creepy encounters from McDonald's employees. Before we start, be sure to follow the Darkness Prevails podcast on Spotify or iTunes or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, and leave us a review on iTunes too to help us grow. Now, let's begin. Night Drive from Scott C. I had been working the night shift at work, starting from 4 p.m. and finishing up at 3 a.m. The shift was a drag, but I pottered in doing my usual welding and fabricating trailers for a good firm that treated its staff like people, unlike some that treat them as numbers. The job entailed fabricating small parts into a much bigger and heavier metal trailer, used for the base of some sort of oil rigging structure abroad. It was a fairly new job and I enjoyed it, but this night, not so much. I would have felt the opposite to this if I'd gotten some sleep during the day, but the water company has been working on some underground pipes out at my house for the past 3 days. With the yelling over the loud machinery and what I think is drilling equipment, I've not had much rest. That aside, I finished my shift. It said 3:02 a.m. on the clocking out machine on the wall. It makes this horrible beeping noise when I scan my card. I cringe at the sound that always goes straight through me. I walked to my car, which was a mere 15 meters away from the entrance of the building. I unlocked it, hopped in, and threw my bag and jacket over the passenger seat, slouching back with my hands on my face. I rubbed my eyes exhaustedly and sighed. Just to get through the drive home, it was a 52-mile round trip with 5 miles of motorway and the rest country lanes. I usually enjoy the country roads, but how crumpled I felt right now, I didn't want to do anything silly. I fired up the car and pulled out of the works car park. It was silent, not a peep on the road. I thought, great, nobody to be stuck behind, so it shouldn't take me too long to get home. I approached the motorway, took the slip road, and carried on down it for the remaining 5 miles, until I hit the country roads at the end. I was scared I was going to drift off, so I had the cold blowers on, blowing full blast in my face to encourage me to stay awake. The road has its few twists and turns, but mainly it's just pretty straightforward, with thick heavy-set trees on both sides that are quite intimidating at this time. I was driving straight when I see a white flash out of the corner of my eye on my driver's side in the woods, which is completely not possible, because I was in the middle of nowhere, pretty much with nothing and no one around for a good couple of miles. I see it again, but now closer to me. I'm still thinking this is very weird. All my mind could dig up was that it was someone hunting close by in the woods for deer. My mind settled until the thought that it had been deathly silent when I saw the 2 flashes. I didn't have the radio on. It was completely quiet. My mind begins going again. The quicker I get out of here, the better, I thought to myself. There was a long, tight corner coming up in 500 yards, and this is one you don't want to lose control on. I started to brake for it, as the pistons in my left side brake caliper had piped out, and I hadn't had time to get them fixed, so I only had my driver's side one on the front working. I went into the corner with no problems. As I was going around, I give it a bit more gas, when, out of nowhere, this person was standing right in the middle of the road. I slammed on my brakes and turned my steering wheel to the left, sending my car flipping sideways, rolling 6 times before eventually abruptly smashing into a thick tree, bringing me to a painful halt. I was hanging upside down, seatbelt jammed in the buckle, warm blood flooding my head. I knew then I was screwed. I tried and tried to wriggle free until the buckle gave in, leaving me crumpling to the roof of the car in a daze. Gathering my thoughts, I scrambled out of the car. I was soaked in blood, which was coming from a gash the size of a carp's mouth just above my right eye. I panicked, not being able to feel anything. My body was numb. I put it down to shock. I stood covering my gushing wound with my hand that was shaking more than a buzzing bee baby's toy. I looked up to notice that person, the same dang person that gave me such a fright that I veered off the road for, nearly ending my life with immediate effect. I was scared, very scared indeed at what I was looking at. This thing, it wasn't a person, but more a person from shoulders to toes, I guess. It had a terrifying breath-stopping goat's head attached to it, big twisted horns, and a bloody mouth. I did not believe what I was seeing. It started to come closer, and I began to shout, "No, no, stop!" It ran at me faster than I could imagine, ripping into the side of the car where I was. It was screaming, clawing, and scuffling with the metal panels to get to me. I felt a thud on my head and another warm trickle running down my face. That's all I remember before waking up in the hospital ICU ward. I was battered and bruised. Apparently, a night-driving trucker came across the mess in the road and called the police. I don't know if that thing was going to kill me or not, but my senses tell me it was. Thanks to that trucker for saving my life. Stalkers in the Brush, from Mr. Spoopy. When I was 7 years old, my father, sister, and I usually went on car rides. Many a time, these were just fun, enjoyable experiences that pleased and excited me, save for the times when my, at the time, teenage sister and her friends suggested to my dad that we investigate abandoned structures or graveyards. So on the night in question, they suggested that we go to a horse trail. I wouldn't have had an issue with this normally, but seeing as it was 10 or 11 at night, and I was still afraid of the dark, I hated the idea. However, my dad and sister with her friends unanimously agreed. Her friends, Nana and Cass, who were with us, were similar in mindset to my sister. So I was outnumbered. As we were cruising down the road toward the place, I was heavily breathing, heart already racing. So as one would expect when we arrived at the gate to the trails, I was on the verge of crying. My father got out to move the gate to the side so we could get through. He walked back and hopped back in. He turned and looked at me as we were about to go forward. He puts his hand on me and says, "It's fine, Bubba. We'll be fine, I promise." Which filled me with some kind of relief. Even as we went deeper into the darkness and further away from the safety of the light, I continued to plead. "Can we do something else, please?" Nevertheless, we pulled up onto the gravel trail and parked the car. I listened to the quiet cricket-filled night as the engine died. My sister had no such hesitation, jumping out as soon as the car stopped moving, her friends following after her. "Come on, Kyle, get out of the car. No monsters are gonna get ya," said my father in an attempt to sway me. "Yeah, are you afraid, buddy?" my sister asked, genuinely seeming to care. I shakily replied with a simple, "No," and stepped out, needing my sister to help me to the ground. I remember that night had been bright, with no clouds in the sky and a full moon illuminating the ghastly trees around us, looking like a bony version of what they were during summer. The gravel made it even worse, always making me look over my shoulder to see if someone was behind me. The howling wind lapped at my skin like a whip. Behind me, my sister and her friends were conversing about something I didn't care to concentrate on. My father was up front shining a light as to allow us to see. Nana and my sister were talking about how bright the night was and how great an idea it was to come out here. Oh, how they were going to come to regret that. We came upon a glade with grass that towered over my dad, who was 5'11". Even as young as I wasn't dumb. I knew that cornfields and any place where you can't see 5 feet in front of you is killer central. I turned to my dad.
"Dad, can we go? I'm scared."
Before he could answer my query, a faint rustling rang through our ears. My dad immediately warned us to shut off our flashlights. Me and the others obliged, albeit confused. If not for the beams of moonlight raining down, we may not have seen the shape moving through the tall grass before us. By then, my dad had whispered to us, "We're leaving." That was just what I wanted to hear, minus the creature in the brush. Fortunately for us, the trail looped around, meaning that no matter which way we went, we would arrive back at the parking lot. We moved slowly down the path as to not provoke whatever creature or creatures were pursuing us. The rustling continued behind us. The source of the cacophony remained unknown. We then arrived on a narrow part of the path that could only fit about 2 or 3 people side to side at most. By now, my sister and her friends had gone from creeped out to full-on panicked. I was in the middle, protected by my father behind me and the others ahead. I felt warm tears flow down my cheeks as we kept a steady pace to the safety of the van. That was when, to the side of us, we heard the yipping and guttural growling. The forest on both sides of the trail was thick, and even with the light the moon provided, we could not see anything, save for the dark shapes running by. We continued walking until my dad must have realized that whatever was hunting us was making an attempt to cut us off from the van. He simply said, "Start running now." Nana and my sister snatched my hands and yanked me forward. We booked it back to the van and my tiny legs barely kept up, even being dragged at some points. We seemed to have taken the creatures by surprise as the rustling ceased. But then it came back. The snarling and yipping grew even louder. My dad stopped and yelled to my sister to go to the van and to start it if he was not back in 10 minutes. We did as he said, as stupid as his decision was. We got in the car and slammed the doors, and my dad came running to the van, jumping into the driver's side. He started the car and we got to the exit when something big slammed into the side of the van. We felt it tip onto 2 wheels. I reeled from the impact as it was right on the driver's side backseat door. Everyone except my father screamed. We floored it out of there and down the road. I cried and cried until we arrived home. All of us were shaken from the encounter. My mother asked what was wrong, but I could barely speak for the rest of the night. The day after the incident, my dad called me outside and presented to me the massive dent in the side of the van. 7 years later, my sister and I still question what they were. It was possible that it may have been a skinwalker, something my sister claims to have encountered many times, but to my knowledge, they don't hunt in packs. Whatever it was no bear, because where I am, there are none. Be careful when you decide to hike a trail at night, for it may be your undoing. Horror at a government property. From Made It, the Body. It was June of 2018. My family, a family friend, and I decided it would be fun to drive out to a particular place that is popular among people searching for aliens. Chances are you've heard of it, as it's extremely popular and is owned by the government. The location is in the middle of nowhere, and what was supposed to be only an hour or two long drive turned into almost 4 hours. By the time we got to the themed gift shop, it was already 9 p.m. We stopped in the gift shop, which was closing, and looked around for a bit. We then decided to drive farther up the road and see if we could find anything interesting. As we drove down this dark road, we must have hit like 5 rabbits. They kept darting across the road, so the trip was already off to a terrible start. After about 20 minutes, we turned down a dirt road. Finally, we reached the gate. It was covered top to bottom in no trespassing signs, with watchtowers on either side. It seemed pretty legit, so we turned around and drove down the road for a few minutes so we could stop and look at the stars. We could still see the gate in the distance. Basically, the way it's set up is a road with expansive desert on either side, with pitch black darkness in front of us and the gate behind us. Now, this is where it gets weird. We parked our car on the right side of the road and then went to the other side to sit and look at the stars. We kept hearing strange noises, like bushes rustling and footsteps. It felt like we were being watched on all sides. We thought it must have been a bunny, right? Wrong. We realized that after turning down the dirt road, there were absolutely no animals. I can only assume that it must have been guards of the area watching us. We continued looking at the stars, and we kept seeing these bright lights that looked like stars, but they were moving very irregularly. They'd move a little to the right, then change directions, then speed up, stop, and disappear. They were moving abnormally fast for airplanes, which by the way weren't even allowed to fly within the area. And then we all looked down at the same time, noticing a bright orange light sitting on top of a distant mountain. So we all watched this light, and then we all looked back up to the sky where we saw more moving lights. Once we looked back down, the orange light was gone. So we carried on with our stargazing for a few more minutes, when all of a sudden the light came back, and this time it was headed right for us, and it brought a friend. These 2 huge lights were hurtling towards us extremely fast, and we had no idea what to do or think. Just as we decided we should probably run for our lives, the lights disappeared. We watched the stars for a while longer, and then decided it was time to go. But we couldn't leave. Our car had a flat tire, the one facing the side with the desert. So we changed the tire as fast as we could, then booked it back home. I have no idea what happened to the tire since it wasn't flat on our way there. All I know is, I'm never going back there again. That's the Wrong Prankster. From Anonymous. Back in 2016, my friend Lachlan and I thought about doing the best prank ever. It's the ghost girl walking through the streets prank. I went to some Halloween store where they sell the white dress that's the perfect fit for Lachlan. Then I got some red paint for fake blood for the white dress and a long wig for covering Lachlan's face. After buying the stuff, I went home to set it up. Lachlan tried on the whole costume, and I thought it was pretty scary. Scary enough to scare my friends, at least. These other two friends are Jesse and Gavin. Now it was time to set the plan into motion. I called the two of them and told them to meet each other in the car, then come pick me up so we could drive around that night around 10 p.m. They agreed and hung up. It was 8 p.m. at the time. The perfect time, in fact, to take Lachlan in his costume to the scary bridge that no one drives through anymore. It took us about half an hour to get there. I dropped Lachlan off on the scary bridge, telling him, "When you see the light of their car, walk all creepy like a ghost girl. See you when we're done." I drove back to the house and waited until 10. Soon Jesse and Gavin arrived, and I hopped in their car. I asked Jesse, who was driving, "Hey man, can I drive tonight?" He replied, "Sure, why not?" He let me in the driver's seat, and we took off. Now this is where the fun begins. I make my way to the same street where I drove to drop Lachlan off on the scary bridge. But things get weird here. I must have driven about 20 minutes when I saw Lachlan walking on the road. He wasn't on the bridge, but the road. All Jesse and Gavin saw was a creepy, ghost-looking girl walking on the road. They were practically begging me to drive away now. I told them, "Wait, I need to text Lachlan about this." I texted him, "Hey dude, why are you 10 minutes away from the bridge and walking on the road?" A few seconds later, Lachlan texted back. He said, "What do you mean? I'm at the bridge waiting for y'all. Where are you anyway?" My heart sank when I read that. Quickly, I texted back, "Wait there, I'm picking you up. We're not doing this anymore." So, Lachlan was 10 minutes away. Who was in this costume? What are the odds that it's another prankster in the same outfit? Jesse and Gavin were still begging me to go back. I told them, "We need to go past this prankster." Jesse shouted, "No way!" I ignored him, and I began to drive past whoever was in the same costume. I drove slowly and steadily. When I passed the person, I got a glimpse of their face. I couldn't breathe. What I saw was either the most realistic-looking makeup, or that was not a costume. I drove faster now, knowing that I had to pick Lachlan up, but tempted to just drive away. 10 minutes later, I made it to the bridge where Lachlan was waiting. He was just sitting on a rock waiting for me. I honked at him and he came in. Lachlan asked me what was going on. Now everyone needed an answer. I told Lachlan what happened, and I told Jesse and Gavin about the prank we had planned. It was supposed to be a prank for you guys, but it was interrupted. I began to drive back, dreadfully knowing we'd have to pass the same stretch of road where we saw that girl. But 10 minutes later, when we should have been seeing her, she wasn't there. But I wasn't going to ask why. I just wanted to get home safely. 20 minutes after that, we got back home okay. We all talked about what happened. After the conversation, Jesse and Gavin headed home. Lachlan stayed the night, which was probably for the better, because what we saw that night made me lose sleep and terrified me for months. Followed home during a late-night drive. From Must Have Been a Ghost. This happened when I was 16. I'm still freaked out about it today. I had a thing with this girl. One night we made plans to sneak out and go stargazing. I lived in the woods about 15 minutes of a drive out of town, so I had to pay my brother gas money to take his car. I got his keys, picked up the girl, who I'll call Elle for this story, and drove to the high school we went to together. Once there, we hang out at the football field for the next 2.5 hours. While we were enjoying each other's company, Elle noticed the same white Ford F-150 driving by the road by the high school several different times, as if they were watching us. I took note of this, but didn't pay it much mind after that. We didn't want to go home yet, as we were having a good time together. It was only 2:30 at that point. We chose to drive to a park about 20 minutes of a drive out of town together, 10 minutes away from my house. As we were driving, I noticed the same headlights behind us for the last 10 minutes, which kinda gave me bad vibes. I mentioned this to Elle, who immediately brought up the white Ford. Us being young and paranoid, I decided to pull off into a neighborhood and see if they followed. After a few random turns, sure enough, it was still following us. The headlights were still a little ways behind, so after making a right turn, I floored it down the road. I turned off my headlights and pulled into some random driveway next to a big truck and turned off the car. Elle slouched down in her seat, but I turned around to watch as the same white Ford F-150 drove by. At this point, Elle was freaking out, and I was trying to calm her down. The truck drove by one more time, so we waited 15 minutes or so before leaving the neighborhood from the opposite way we came. Elle had called her older sister, and we agreed it would be best if we just went to my house since it was closer. We waited an hour or two before taking Elle home. By then, we were about 10 minutes from my house, and the roads to my house from there were 2-lane forest roads with no lights. Elle had mostly calmed down, as had I, but I was still very cautious and constantly checking my mirrors. 2 minutes after we pulled out of the neighborhood, I checked my rearview mirror and my heart sank. There, about 200 feet behind us, I could see red taillights on the road, but no headlights. The truck began to follow us, with no headlights on. I immediately called my brother, who said he would meet us on the edge of our property with his AR-15. Elle was crying, and I tried my best to console her, but she was terrified, and rightfully so. We make it back to the house, and my brother was waiting with his AR-15 at the beginning of the driveway. At some point, the truck behind us had pulled off, which I didn't notice because the headlights were off. My brother came with me to drop off Elle. I stayed with her till the early morning, until her parents would be waking up. She is still traumatized by that night, and I feel really bad for asking her if she wanted to hang out that night. Nothing else ever came of the situation, except a creepy story for me and a bad memory for Elle. Real disturbing encounter. From Anonymous. This actually happened very recently. A few months ago, my friends and I were partying and driving around the back roads a few miles outside of town for fun. Everything was normal for us, and we were all laughing at the stupidest things. I looked out my passenger window and nudged the driver to look as well, because standing about 3 feet from the road, still and rigid, was a ratty-looking woman, dressed in what appeared to be a torn-up trench coat with a large bag in her hand. She simply stared straight forward at nothing but trees as we flew past her. I asked all my friends if they saw her, and only the driver and I had. I told my friend to turn the car around and we'd cruise by again, despite the others' protest of her simply being a homeless lady. This time, my friend dropped down to a smooth 15 miles per hour to get a good look at her, which made me extremely uneasy. I remember contemplating the situation over and over again in my head. Soon we were close enough, and I was looking to point her out to the others as we further slowed to a stop. But despite her previously being on the right side of the road by the blown-out tire, she was no longer there. Suddenly, and literally out of nowhere, I look to my right, and the woman is pressed up against the window. I had previously slightly rolled down the window so the smoke could escape, but she began screaming and reaching at me through the crevice. My friend stepped on the gas, and it dragged her nearly 10 feet until we left her lying on the road. We ended up driving by there again the next day, when we were almost all sober again, to make sure it wasn't just our intoxicated minds fooling us. However, when we rolled by, there was only the large black bag we had seen. We all had our theories of what was in it, but we could only assume the worst. This was one of the many terrifying events that I have endured over the years, but nothing stuck in my head like the gut-wrenching scream from that insidious woman waiting down the back roads for assistance.